here we go.
Welcome to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back in to the 9 Route Fantasy Football Podcast. Pat and Scott, we are in the end of the holidays, I guess. Christmas holiday, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa just starting today, the 26th of December we are recording on. I hope everybody out there had a safe and magical Christmas. I unfortunately did not when it came to fantasy football playoffs. I know some of you are there with me. Some of you did get to unwrap a huge gift. But before we get into that, folks, I just want to thank everybody again for listening to the podcast here at the 9 Route. If you want to get in touch with us now, next year, years to come, got a couple ways to do that. First, our website is www.the9routeffb.com. You can always shoot us an email, the9routeffb@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at the9route1. I am at Scott from Delco. If you want to give us a heads up, tell us what we're doing great, what we need to work on, anything in between, how your holiday was, how bad you got beat, or how great you beat somebody else. And hopefully that we helped you get to a fantasy football championship. Pat, first of all, how was your holiday and how was your fantasy football holiday? There's two parts to that.
The actual holiday went much better than the fantasy football holiday, that's for sure.
Same's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Christmas is definitely, I think, one of probably everybody's favorite times of year. But, for those of us who are fantasy football players and football fans in general, it was really nice to have football all weekend. Did get to watch all of the games on Sunday. Missed a couple on Saturday watched all the games on Saturday. Missed a couple on Sunday, seeing some family and things like that. But at that point, I think by Sunday night, I was pretty much completely out of both of my playoffs that I was kind of hoping to win. Still in it in one league that I don't really care too much about. And then obviously there's that one that there is no playoffs. You just play until the end of the season. I did pretty well in that one again, but really, really wanted to pick up another championship in one of my leagues that I kind of dominated over the past few years and got completely smoked. It actually wasn't even the other team that did all that well. My team just completely did not show up. I think they all took Christmas off, and I think I had two players, aside from my quarterback, I had two players scoring double digits on my entire team. So it wasn't a good day for me at all. And then in our one dynasty league that we play in together, looks like I'm going to get beat by about 100 points in that one. So really, really bad overall, but can't complain. Like I said, the fact that we're sitting here complaining about fantasy football just shows how good we really have it. And this time of year always kind of helps to remind me, especially that, as much as I love fantasy football and as much as I want to win these matchups, there are much more important things in life. And I just keep telling myself that so that I don't throw my phone across the room every time I look at the scores.
Yeah, kind of doing that Stuart Smalley affirmation back in the day. Good enough, smart enough, and doggone it, my fantasy football team's good. Yeah, same boat. I'm one playoff, and I'm getting crushed by over 110 points. Got two players left, but it was a bum fight, backup quarterbacks in a dynasty league, and ironically, the guy I went against a cockroach Cowboys fan in one Heisman. Yeah, whatever, dude. But, you had both of my backups that, actually had a pretty good game. And then I had one of your two backups. It was brutal. It's a shame to watch. Just like, it was tough to watch the Eagles lose a tough one. Little questionable things here and there. But, yeah, overall, holidays are good. And, again, we're, like you say, we're fortunate to still be able to talk about football, unlike probably the first person we're going to talk about, which, I do have to commend the organization for at least letting it breathe until the end of the actual holiday. Because, going back to like Friday, like how the hell you get fired on your day off? How the hell you get fired on Christmas? But Pat, you want to get started, and I'll chime in on the first tidbit of news that we have that just broke today.
Time for the news. So apparently Nathaniel Hackett, the first-year Broncos head coach, was fired Today was not a good sight. Like I said, that was one of the games that I didn't really get to watch much of. But, after hearing, what happened and just kind of watching the score as, I check on my phone every so often and seeing how badly the Broncos were just getting annihilated, I was like, oh, this is not good for Hackett. And sure enough, today turns out that he was let go as the head coach of the Broncos. It's funny, the guy that he actually hired to come in and help him with you remember the very first game of the season, they had that little snafu where they didn't know whether to call timeout, and then they went for it on like 4th and 5 instead of trying to kick a 57-yard field goal or whatever it was to win the game. Mm-hmm. But the senior assistant coach, Jerry Rosenberg, was brought in to sort of help Nathaniel Hackett with his clock management and, just be like a senior advisor to him, somebody who's been around the league for a very long time. He's going to take over as the interim head coach, but not a good Christmas for Nathaniel Hackett, to say the least.
No, I mean, through the season, I think we all, kind of joked about it. Beginning of the season, preseason, I know a lot of people had, that organization pegged, Russell Wilson moving to a team with a fresh start. Denver, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Albert Okwuegbunam was going to be like a big guy. You had Javonte Williams and Gordon, the timeshare. But, hey, everything pointed to, all signs up. Now, I've never been a big Russ fan, but I was not expecting what has gone on. And I think some of that, you've heard whispers that Hackett was hired to try to attract Aaron Rodgers to come there, via trade, free agent contract and whatnot. And that kind of fell through. And it's bad. Yeah. You said you didn't really get to see it. I'm as anti Baker Mayfield as possible, but my God, Pat, it was like watching him do victory laps and Russ just throwing the ball to the other team. And then you had Brett Rippon, chewing out the O-line for not protecting. I saw Cortland Sutton throwing his hands up when he was missed on a clear play where he was wide open because it looked like Russ was doing a little deep ball, hero ball type stuff. Like it's crazy. I mean, you had fights at the end of the game between both teams in a sense where Randy Gregory and the O-lineman from the Rams kind of had a little shove and match while everybody's doing the post-game hugs and it's Christmas and it almost kind of backed into Baker Mayfield's interview, which is like just the most amazing thing. So it just looks like that. It really did. It was like that whole organization really has to kind of take a look in the mirror, I think, at this point and realize that, they can't, you finish the season out, you limp to the barn and you just don't try to make that out of the box smart hire. I think people look at teams like Philadelphia that pulls a Nick Sirianni out, but Sirianni also has a great support staff with Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon and came from a coaching tree that had a little bit of a pedigree versus a guy that had just been with a guy that had just been an assistant. And I think some of that is tough. Now, Sean Payton's name's mentioned, obviously some of your top guys in the league, maybe because it's in division, maybe Eric Bieniemy finally gets a shot at a head coaching job. It's hard to tell based off of that, but yeah, this was an epic fail for a team that just, again, with a coaching staff that just couldn't put anything together. And you make that trade to get Russell Wilson and you give away the farm. And it just doesn't help. 5 of the Broncos' first 6 losses, 8 total have been one-score games. So you're right there in those games. But, when your defense is giving up, before yesterday was giving up under 20 points a game, but you're only scoring basically 2 touchdowns a game, it's not going to work. And you're not going to win, let alone be a coach that can justify having a job after that.
Yeah, I actually was one of the people who thought that the Broncos were going to be unstoppable this year. I think we said this in the preseason that this team reminded me of the Rams. They had all of the pieces. They had the offensive talent at every position except for quarterback. They had defensive talent. Obviously, their defense had been good last year, even better this year. And it's fallen apart. And I'm not, yes, of course, the head coach and the quarterback are the first 2 people to get the blame. And, this is exactly what happens when you have expectations that are that high and you fall that far short. I mean, I think if the Broncos had gone even 7-8 at this point, Hackett would still have a job. They'd be talking about trying to figure out how to pick up a couple more wins to get into the playoffs next year. But the fact that they're 4-11 coming into week 17, they just got absolutely trounced on Christmas Day in front of the entire world. Basically, anybody who was watching football yesterday, it was just
my mother-in-law was like, "Damn, they suck." And she kind of knows a little bit about football, but anybody could smell blood in the water. Yeah, it's a tough one, and that is one of those statement games that just really takes you out from a team that really had nothing to play for in the Rams. I mean, they're out of it technically too. I mean, technically people have that mathematical possibilities of still being in the 7th seed, wild card stuff, but yeah, man, and a tough division that they're in, where 2 of the 3 teams are pretty much going to be in the playoffs. One had a shot. It's bad, and I just thank God it's not here. Thank God it's out there.
All right, well, let's move on to some better news. Mike White looks like he has been cleared to play this week versus Seattle, and just in time because the Jets offense since Russell Wilson, since
basically
Zach Wilson,
same kind of player. You're
right,
not
maybe
wrong.
it's the name. Since Zach Wilson took back over the reins at quarterback, has been terrible. He is actually, as reported, is going to be inactive this week. Joe Flacco is going to step in as the backup. Again, bad situation for Zach Wilson, but very good situation for the Jets getting Mike White back. I think that, obviously the offense played a lot better under Mike White and, was able to score some points. He's able to throw the ball, on a much more consistent basis than Wilson has been able to. So really good news for the Jets, who are outside of the playoff picture right now, but close enough to where they can still make a run. And, that loss on Thursday night against the Jacksonville Jaguars did hurt them, but I think the Jets still, if they win out, I think they have a pretty good chance at making the playoffs still. So hopefully Mike White will be the guy to help them do that.
Yeah, no, I think he does. I think, the team rallied around him when he came in. We all saw Joe Flacco, turn into a top 10 QB for those first couple of games until Zach Wilson was ready to go. So, yeah, maybe he helps right the ship and give them that playoff push, a little 2-week inspiration that they can get over the hump. Another quarterback to speak of. This one hits a little close to home. Jalen Hurts did not play against the Dallas Cowboys this weekend, and it was, he's injured. They just want to make sure they're lining up for the playoffs. His shoulder is still in doubt, so to speak. We'll probably find out a little bit closer to Wednesday if they're looking to do anything to get him involved. Right now they're still considering him uncertain for week 17 against the New Orleans Saints. The Eagles have not wrapped anything up yet officially as far as number 1 seed. Minnesota just keeps clawing away and could leapfrog them if there's a couple losses and wins in the right columns for both teams. So not to mention New Orleans is looking to play for something in that division, the NFC South, which is anything you can do, I can do worse, not better. These teams are just trying to find a way to give it away to each other. So, and the Eagles have a little added spice in that, where if the Saints do not make the playoffs and finish with a bottom feeder record, so to speak, the Eagles own that first round pick from the Saints. So there's a lot of moving parts that would be considered for Jalen Hurts. Now, a couple O-line injuries that we might talk about at the end of this that could affect that overall concept, but Jalen Hurts, still uncertain. Would have liked to have had him in my lineup this week for fantasy football, but we're not going to go there, and we're just going to move on to the next 2 injuries, Pat, that had a little bit to do with games that were played yesterday.
Yeah, Christian Watson left the Packers-Dolphins game with a hip injury. He had a decent game before the injury, left, and then did not return. They're still doing tests to find out exactly the extent of the injury. So again, if you have Christian Watson and somehow you made it through to your fantasy championship, something that you're going to want to monitor moving forward to see if he's available to play. Also, Greg Dulcich for the Denver Broncos had a hamstring injury, did not return in that game, and again also had a decent game before the injury. Dulcich has sort of been the one, I guess, kind of bright spot on that offense. This year, he's surprised everyone with how well he's played and sort of taken over the top tight end role in Denver. So definitely a guy that if you're in dynasty leagues or what have you, is a guy that you're going to probably want to get your hands on, because I can see with his pass catching ability, he's a guy who is going to be I think next year when we get into our preseason rankings, he's going to be in that top 12 to 15 going into next year. Again, depending
I
on
think more than that, buddy.
Yeah, possibly. I didn't want to give him too much credit yet, but
It strikes me like you're saying, like, yeah, definitely in that range. Like, he looks like he could be anywhere from a Dawson Knox to a Zach Ertz, depending on how, like you say, and I know where you were going with that, how the offense looks next year with obviously a new coaching staff and who knows what other kinds of moving parts are there. But no, I definitely, yeah, he'll be what do they call them? You know, like deep dives and everything. They'll act like people don't know about him, but you know, we've been talking about him, banging the drum a little bit this season. So
yeah, he's definitely a guy that I got in a trade in a dynasty league as kind of a throw-in piece that I was really interested in, and I'm glad that I did get that piece, because the main piece in that trade didn't end up helping me win at all. That Cooper Kupp trade, but I'm happy to have Dulcich on my roster in that league, and I think that he's going to be a good tight end moving forward. Again, like you said, we just have to see how the offense looks next year, and you know, obviously they're already making changes, so I'm sure there's going to be more changes made in Denver before the start of the 2023 season.
yep. And if you take any nugget from that, folks, Pat, with the knowledge, it's not about the main piece; it's about the side piece. There you go.
All right, let's jump into the waiver wire. Weekly waiver wire. We stopped doing quarterbacks and tight ends for a little bit because we were kind of throwing them into our start sits as, you know, sort of streaming options. But I think this week they are still considered streaming options in some cases. It's just a matter of there's only a few that you could really consider playing this week, considering it is more than likely your championship week. You do want to make sure that, you know, you're not picking up any of these guys for a season-long piece to keep on your roster or anything like that. This is a 1 week. If you do have Jalen Hurts and you know, somehow made it through to the next round, you know, these are some guys that you can look at. Or if you had Lamar Jackson and he, you know, looks questionable for this week as well, some guys that you can potentially put in your lineup this week. So we're going to hit some quarterbacks and we're going to hit some tight ends as well as the running backs and receivers. And the running backs and receivers are actually smaller this week, again, because of the fact that you're not picking them up for the rest of the season. You're picking them up for one game. So we kind of kept all of the waiver wire pickups consistent with, you know, just 1 week start. So all of these guys have fairly decent matchups moving forward, and we'll kind of hit each matchup as we go. So we'll start with Jared Goff at quarterback versus Chicago. Goff is rostered in about 64% of leagues, so he may not be available on your league's waiver wire. But if he is, he's got a really good matchup against the Chicago Bears. They're actually the second best matchup versus the quarterback position over the last 6 weeks. And the Lions, you know, they've been a really good offensive team. They're the 5th highest scoring team in the league. They're obviously still in the hunt for the playoffs. It's a good matchup for them. And I think that Jared Goff, you know, has shown that when he is in the right matchup, he can absolutely deliver. The Lions also get to play this game at home, which is huge for them. They're a much better home team, especially offensively. And you don't have to worry about any of the conditions that we saw this week with the cold and the snow and the wind and all that stuff. You have a nice climate-controlled environment for the Lions offense to operate in. So I really like Jared Goff this week if he's available on your waiver wire, which, again, he may not be. But if he's out there, go out, take a look. Goff is definitely a guy that you could use to replace, you know, any of these injured quarterbacks or maybe quarterbacks who have much, much tougher matchups.
Yeah, another name. Again, you know, sometimes we chuckle, but we talk about Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes, going up against the Indianapolis Colts this week. Not a fantasy darling, but for the season is pretty much a top 12 quarterback. And, you know, watch him maybe like Tua choke a game away and throw 3 picks yesterday. Might, you know, take him off your radar and get somebody else who's a little more involved in not turning the ball over. One of the lower interceptions on the season when it comes to that. He's actually tied with Jalen Hurts for about 5 or 6, which is minimal. They haven't been trying to overdo it, and that's with a pedestrian receiving core, and that's being very polite. Gets a nice matchup this week against the Indianapolis Colts going into Week 17, who over the last 4 weeks has been one of the worst defenses in holding back a quarterback. Obviously, we had that massive game back in the day with Dallas against them, but and even over the last 2 weeks, just taking a peek, it looks like they are the second worst overall against the quarterback. So Danny Dimes, and he can do it with his legs too. Giants are in the playoffs as we speak. It makes them want to finish the slate out strong. They have this week against Indy, final week of the season against the Philadelphia Eagles. So the Giants are looking to make their playoff push. Daniel Jones might help you in yours if he's available. He is owned a lot, but you may have seen somebody drop him in haste, and he'd be a guy to get maybe in your starting lineup, especially with the injuries at quarterback.
Yeah, another guy that we've been talking about quite a bit in the last few weeks is Brock Purdy from the San Francisco 49ers. He gets to go up against the Las Vegas Raiders this week. He's only rostered in about 31% of leagues, so he's still probably available on your waiver wire. The Raiders are the 6th best matchup versus the quarterback position on the season, and San Francisco is still playing for something. I mean, depending on how that Philadelphia-New Orleans game goes at 1 o'clock, if the Eagles lose that game, which, is possible, but probably not necessarily likely, that game becomes for the number 1 overall seed in the NFC still. I mean, the 49ers still have a chance at claiming that number 1 seed. So there's going to be a lot to play for. Plus the fact that Brock Purdy has been excellent in his 4 starts so far this year. He's finished with over 20 fantasy points in almost every start except for the very first one. But 9 total touchdowns, including 1 rushing touchdown, against only 2 interceptions in his last 4 games. He's basically doing exactly what we said he was going to do. He's getting the ball into the hands of his talented weapons, and they are sort of taking over. And he seems to have a really good connection with George Kittle. Kittle's had his 2 best games of the season with Brock Purdy at quarterback. So definitely a guy that you could for sure find a worse option out there. I think I actually like Purdy better than Daniel Jones in this game. This week, I should say, because of the matchup against the Raiders. And I think that, again, he's a guy who, if you're really stranded at quarterback, most of the teams who get to this point in the playoffs pretty much have their quarterback situation figured out. But if you are streaming, or if you did lose a quarterback or about to lose a quarterback this week, Brock Purdy is an option that is much better than I think you're going to find out there, aside from maybe Jared Goff, like we said, who is rostered in most leagues, so probably not available. So I really like Brock Purdy this week versus the Raiders.
Another quarterback, and this will actually be the last gentleman we'll talk about, the Red Rocket, Andy Dalton. We did briefly talk about the Saints. They're fighting for a playoff spot. They still have a chance to possibly win that division. Obviously, a lot of math and wins and losses involved. Probably only owned by about maybe 10%. 10, 11% in most leagues. Going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, which, right off the bat on the cover there, you'd say, oh, well, that's a tough matchup. But the Eagles have been giving up some points to the quarterback position. They're a winning team and they're a winning franchise and everything else. They look like they have the 1 seed locked up. But Andy Dalton is a veteran quarterback who is commanding an offense that, yes, did have a quiet game this past week, but with the weather conditions in Cleveland, that was to be expected. They're going to be throwing the kitchen sink at every team that they play against. And the Saints and the Eagles, there's a little bad blood that's been there for a couple of years now, going back to our Super Bowl win back in 2017. The chances of Andy Dalton being competitive this week are pretty high. Even if the Eagles are blowing them out, you're talking about garbage points. You have Chris Olave. You have a lot of receivers out there on that team and that offense that make things work. Alvin Kamara is always a factor that could be involved. But Andy Dalton, I think, is worth a look if you're really desperate, considering the matchup that he has against a team that has been leaking oil when it comes to stopping the quarterback, and that the Saints still have a lot to play for against the Philadelphia Eagles.
All right, let's move on to some running backs that are available that you could probably pick up and play in your championship. Again, these are 1 week sort of plays. There are probably running backs out there that are rostered in less leagues or, may have long-term potential in, say, dynasty leagues or keeper leagues or whatever. But we're talking specifically for week 17. Tyler Algier is 35% rostered, gets to go against the Arizona Cardinals this week. Arizona is the second best matchup versus the running back position on the season. And Algier leads Atlanta running backs in carries, targets, receptions, and total yards last week versus Baltimore. I don't see Cordero Patterson really being as involved anymore. I think that Atlanta is at the point where they're out of the playoff race. They're not eligible to win that division, which really kind of tells you where Atlanta is this year, that they can't win the NFC South. But I think they're kind of taking a look at their younger players at this point. And, with Desmond Ridder being in there, Algier's going to get a lot of the work. You're still seeing targets going to Drake London. So, I think Atlanta is sort of gauging what they have moving forward. And I think they're going to play a lot of their younger players. And I think Algier is once again going to lead this team in snaps, going to lead the team in carries, and has the best chance against a pretty bad Arizona defense to put up some fantasy points for you this week. So if you're in a bind at the running back position, you're looking for a flex option, I think Tyler Algier is for sure a good option this week versus the Arizona Cardinals.
Couple more running backs to speak of. Jonathan Taylor out for the rest of the season. That means a couple gentlemen by the name of Deion Jackson and Zach Moss will need to step up. They've had some moments throughout the season where they looked, especially recently, where they look like, it might be a little more than a blip on the radar, albeit it is Jonathan Taylor's backfield. But going up against the New York Giants, Deion Jackson a little more available than Zach Moss because he kind of leapfrogged him with a little more usage over the last 2 weeks. Going up against the New York Giants, who are a pretty solid matchup. Just taking a look, that they've been one of the bottom teams against the running back as far as stopping the run and not giving up points to the position, PPR, and the like. To me, that is a little bit of a recipe for a team that, with the Colts, they have Jeff Saturday as coach. They're not going to make the playoffs, but they can play the role of spoiler. They can end the season, never leave the gym on a miss. So to know that you had a contending team against a playoff team and in a spot where you have a lot of injuries, these are two guys that could be like a low-key flex, depending on which one gets the usage. If it's more of a split type of thing on that level, Nick Foles is going to be the quarterback. At least we're actually going into the final game of Week 16. So the Colts are yet to play the Los Angeles Chargers tonight. So this will be a little more definitive, I think, possibly after tonight. But Deion Jackson, Zach Moss, you probably want to hang on to them, even if it keeps away from somebody else that's scrambling for running back / flex help.
Yeah, it kind of sucks that we record before the Monday night game because we really don't know which one of these two guys is going to get most of the work. Watching that game tonight is going to tell us a lot as far as, which running back is the running back to own. I mean, it's always possible it could be a fairly even split, which unfortunately I think that might be how this game kind of turns out. But yeah, I do agree. Pick both of these guys up, especially if you see one take, the lion's share of the carries and snaps. I think you can absolutely jump on whoever that is and potentially play them next week versus the Giants. One other running back that you could potentially think about grabbing, again, I'm not super excited about this guy, but Royce Freeman from the Houston Texans, he gets to go against the Jacksonville Jaguars next week. Freeman is pretty much available in every league. He's less than 1% rostered when I looked today. He led the Texans in running back touches the last 2 weeks. He seems like he is the step in for Dameon Pierce. He's a guy, if you're hurting at the running back position, again, you're looking for somebody to throw in a flex or, a lot of these leagues that we play and I play in now are double flex spots. So definitely could find a worse option than Royce Freeman. Jacksonville has been the 10th best matchup versus running backs so far this season. So got a good matchup, getting plenty of carries. And the Texans have actually looked a lot better on offense over the past few weeks. So there actually could be some touchdown opportunity for Royce Freeman versus Jacksonville this week. So I think there are definitely worse options out there, but Freeman's a guy who, if you're desperate, I think you can absolutely grab him and plug him into your lineup this week.
Just to pause real quick for some breaking news. Could be nothing, could be something. But this just in, Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa is once again in concussion protocol per head coach Mike McDaniel. That might explain the second half that he had yesterday, against the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, it's serious. He got beat up pretty bad this season, and the rush back and everything else, and then to see him kind of get back to normal, but where there's smoke, there's fire. If he takes too many more of these or gets into this, that's maybe when the league starts to step in, because it was his injury, his head injury, his concussion, and lack of proper care, diagnoses, whatever you want to call it, that kind of led to a little bit more of a spearhead of the concept. It's been going on for a long time, and then the NFL tried to poo-poo it, but now you're talking about a serious thing where twice in one season, the same guy, you might start to see at the next owners meeting, rules changes, things like that come into play. But it is a shame to see that is an issue for Tua. That means that Teddy Bridgewater would probably get the call up, and Miami's trying to hang on to a playoff spot. So there's a lot going on here. Hopefully he clears it, and it's just something minor. But that just broke as we were recording. Pat, you got anything on that?
Not really. I mean, it's unfortunate for Tua because I think he's having a pretty good season. But, we've talked about this before. Player health is more important than being on the field. And as much as we in the fantasy football community want our guys to be in there, you have to take a back seat to the health of the player. And, I don't want to see anybody, there's been too much that has been brought up. That whole movie with Will Smith about the concussions in the NFL and all that. Like there's too much awareness with it now to, ignore it or try to force guys back out there or even give them the option to get back out there because, these guys want to go out and play. So hopefully he does clear the protocol and can play this week. But if he can't, again, if that's what's in his best interest, then it is what it is at this point.
Then he goes and slaps Chris Rock in the head. Just maybe he was trying to bring attention to it, awareness. It is what it is there. But no, seriously, good luck to Tua. Wide receivers. I know that we can talk about some diamonds in the rough, and we just talked about Daniel Jones being a competent quarterback, a top 12 quarterback with mobility and passing ability. Went over 300 yards in a tough loss against those Minnesota Vikings, lost on a 61-yard field goal at the buzzer. But the Giants have kind of circled the wagons and have started to evolve, if you want to call it that, at the wide receiver position, the passing game. You're not looking at, when's Kenny Galladay going to step up? You're looking at Darius Slayton, who was the guy and then seemed like he was in the doghouse and now has finally gotten back to being a little bit more of the lead dog in that house. Richie James and Isaiah Hodgins, who are all, probably a little bit less than 50% rostered. It's just some of those players that you can find, players from the Houston Texans that get the targets enough to get you a solid flex position and people to monitor moving on to next season. The Giants, again, we just talked about, they are playing for the playoffs to hang on to their spot. They have Indianapolis and they have the Philadelphia Eagles, their last two matchups. They don't want to back in or get backdoored out of the playoffs. These are guys, if you're throwing for 300 yards a game, somebody is making those plays. Someone's getting those targets. It's spread around a little bit, but if you pick up one of these guys right now, the way they're playing, they're all legitimate flex options for your team. And if you're in another playoff or a 2-week window right now, you're running to the end, Darius Slayton, Richie James, Isaiah Hodgins are all that could be on your team or to keep away from somebody else in your league so that you can win and you can watch them, crying their Cheerios because you just beat them for a fantasy football championship.
A couple other guys on the same team that we're looking at, Hunter Renfrow and Mac Hollins, both less than 50% rostered. They get to go up against the San Francisco 49ers this week, which the Niners have a really good defense. But the one place that they tend to struggle is the wide receiver position. They're actually the 7th worst matchup versus the wide receiver position. They tend to crush it everywhere else. They don't give up points to quarterbacks or running backs, or they're actually number 1 in a lot of categories, but ranked 26th versus the wide receiver position. So again, with the Raiders, they're not going to beat you with their defense. They're going to have to score points. They're going to throw the ball. I think teams the past couple weeks have been sort of taking Adams away, or at least doing their best to take him away, as he's had 2 pretty bad games, at least for fantasy owners in the last couple games. But Hunter Renfrow and Mac Hollins have picked up 20 targets between the two of them over the last few games. Waller's been in there with some targets as well. So the Raiders are starting to spread the ball around a little bit more, be less dependent on Devontae Adams. And I think both of them have upside. I think if you're in a PPR league, Hunter Renfrow could, absolutely give you a 7 for 70 type of game. Mac Hollins, not really a PPR type receiver, but is more of the deep threat on this team. And he's been getting targets downfield quite a bit. If he hits on one of those, I mean, you're talking, a 50, 60 yard touchdown. You're talking, 13, 14 fantasy points right there. So either one of these guys is available. Again, we're talking about flex positions, throwing these guys in there in your championship week. Neither one of these guys am I extremely confident in, but they've been usable in fantasy from time to time. You'd probably have to guess which one. And I think depending on, what you're looking for, if you're looking for a safe play, Hunter Renfrow is probably more your speed. If you're looking for, potential big play, big game ability, you're looking at Mac Hollins. But both of these guys are available in at least half of leagues. So if you do need another wide receiver, not a bad option to pick up either one of these guys.
I'm going to round out with a couple tight ends, 3 to be exact. First is someone we did talk about, talking about Denver Broncos and all that stuff. Greg Dulcich obviously could have a little bit of an issue down the stretch there with a potential hamstring injury. Again, they have nothing to play for. They might just sandbag it and just say, you know what, let's let you get healthy. You had a nice little matchup throughout the season against different teams. But if he does get back on the field, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's only rostered in about a little less than 50% of leagues. People are staying away from bad offenses. They don't even think about them. They don't look at them. They don't look at anything as an investment. Redraft leagues obviously are one way of that, but with Keeper, Dynasty, definitely this guy is probably off the table. Kansas City, they're like middle of the road against the tight end position. So, the chances of Dulcich getting a pretty good shot at points with who knows what the offense is going to look like with interim head coach and some changes moving around. Russ, is he there still? I mean, with that contract, you have to think there's no way he's sitting on the bench unless he's hurt. But even he has been one using that tight end position pretty solid throughout the season. Dulcich has been getting close to 6 targets a game over the last 5 games. Second on the team during that time to Jerry Jeudy. Cortland Sutton's been a little banged up. He's been out of action. He's back now, but we even saw yesterday Dulcich make some plays until he got a little too worse for wear and had to come out of the game and did not return. But definitely a player I think you want to get on your roster, has potential to be a starting tight end for this week if healthy. Again, if the signs point to no and the injury news comes out that he's out for the week or even longer, obviously then you would stay away and look to move on to one of these other options. One of those other options is Hunter Henry. Dun, 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 dun. He was a darling last year. A lot of touchdown catches. Made some PPR action. Was a pretty legit tight end. Been a little bit up and down this year for him against the Miami Dolphins this week, which New England's still kind of hanging around. And as we just said, Miami stands to be without possibly Tua for this week. And looking at their backup quarterback, Hunter Henry is going up basically against the second best matchup against the tight end over the last 6 weeks. Miami, if they're bleeding points to that position, and, Mac Jones has been mostly down, a little up this season. If he's going to look for somebody to, help the game out, move the passing game around, you would think that Henry gets involved. And again, he's fairly available. Again, that's another offense teams have kind of shied away from, is that New England Patriots offense outside of the running game. So definitely Hunter Henry is a guy that you might look to pick up, and possibly you might need to spot start him depending on injuries and the matchups that go on. But he has a good matchup this week against the Miami Dolphins. And then we'll finish out with one final name. Still 6 degrees of Russell Wilson. We're going to Noah Fant of the Seattle Seahawks. They go up against the New York Jets this week. Now, this is a juicy matchup. It's a Geno Smith revenge game going back to the Jets. Noah Fant has been fairly solid this season, but he's definitely available. 30% rostered, most leagues combined, so should be available. The Jets are good defense, but they do have their issues against that tight end position. Most of these aggressive defenses do that. The linebackers get involved, a lot of pass rush, a lot of run blitz, and it does leave these teams susceptible. We look at like a Tampa Bay, for instance, as a team that often can get to the quarterback but can't stop the tight end the way their defense is built. He's a top 10 matchup this week against that defense. And then, he's had 3 straight games with a touchdown catch. So, Geno Smith is looking for options. Tyler Lockett could be available. It's still on the fence when it comes to that. And Marquise Goodwin picked up a little bit of an injury with his wrist. We'll see if that has a factor. So if it's DK Metcalf or bust, I think that helps Noah Fant against a team that, again, bleeds points to that tight end position. And again, these are 3 guys that you may not normally want to start, but if they're available, we're looking at matchup bases. And with that tight end position, unless you have one of those top 5 or 6 Cadillacs, some of these guys could actually outperform them on a week. But at the same time, we're just trying to give you that little bit of a push to give you a name that might be the guy that you wouldn't consider under normal circumstances to help you win this week and possibly a championship.
Yeah, tight end's always tough because, like you said, there are a couple of guys that, you just put in your lineup and just kind of set it and forget it. But then those of us who don't have, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, or, Dalton Schultz, or, whoever it's been recently, George Kittle, you kind of have to search for tight ends. So, yeah, I think these 3 options are solid for this week. That is going to do it for our waiver wire pickups for this week. Again, with your championship week 17 matchup in mind, again, we're not looking at this point, there's no season long options. There's nothing. There's 1 week left. So you definitely want to try to grab these guys who are going to help you win now if you need that help. Also want to remind you, if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, click that little plus in the upper right-hand corner for us. That will follow the show and let us know that you are listening and that you want us to keep putting out good fantasy football content for you. If you're listening on YouTube or Google Podcasts or Podbean or iHeartRadio, there is a way to subscribe and follow the show. Please do that. That helps us out immensely. We also want to thank Mickey's Protocol Pub in Tuckerton, New Jersey for partnering with the show. If you're looking for a great place to watch the NFL on Sunday, Mickey's is it. Great food, drink specials, and all the football you can handle. Mickey's Pub, 327 East Main Street in Tuckerton, New Jersey, where friends and family meet. Well, Scott, I guess with our bad run this past weekend, not going to be too many championships in our sites. I think I still, like I said, I'm still going for 2. I don't know how championships work in that one dynasty league that we're in. I mean, I guess if I finish first overall, that's championship in my book. I'm gonna take it.
That's a quirky league. It's a Emperor Dynasty league we got into 2 years ago, being, in the biz, so to speak. And, we're in there with some people that are in the fantasy football community. And it's a points-based league. It's not so much the head-to-head, but yet you do get wins and losses based on it. So I'm still not quite sure. It's you hate saying, oh, yeah, I signed that paper and don't know what I signed. But just to get into it, to kind of say, hey, what the hell, let's see what happens. And yeah, you did pretty well last season. I think you were top 3 or 4.
I think I finished second last year.
Second, yeah. And then this year you did the redraft, which, was kind of murky. And then you came out of there like, dude, I think I feel like I should, have to go like get an alias because you robbed everybody and you end up with a pretty good roster. And then, you kind of crushed it throughout. And it does look like, arguably then, yes, you would be the champion of that league. And I believe the rule of the league is if you win 2 years in a row, you get the entire pot.
Right.
From however many years it is. So technically, if you win next year, you would get 3 years worth of buy-ins, which, man, sign up the retirement papers now, man. Jesus, must be nice.
They give some of the prize money out each year to, I think, first and second. I think I got a little bit last year. And then, yeah, like you said, there's a portion of the pot that's withheld for the the emperor, the winner of 2 years in a row. I actually don't hate my chances with the roster that I have if I can, get lucky and avoid injuries. They do an all play. So basically you play against every other team every single week. So there's 11 potential wins and losses available each week for your team. And so far this year, I am 141-24. So 7 games ahead of the next closest player. And I am currently sitting atop the scoreboard for week 16. So if I can pull this one out and not take any losses this week, I'm almost assured of winning this league this week. So that's become my new favorite league now. It's the one I'm going to pay attention to for the rest of the season, since all these other ones
You still like me. You're my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I know. It does get to that point when you're in a bunch of them that you just kind of bag it. And, it's like, oh, God. I looked at the one I've been out of since basically like week 2. And, I still have and I feel bad. You just feel like you nailed it in. But, yeah, I got guys that were injured. And I'm not like that. I always try to get my lineups stocked. But, you know what? At the end there, you're just kind of like, yeah, I have no shot. I don't care about playing for 7th or 9th in a league that, it's not for bragging rights versus something else. Again, like our home league where we do the toilet bowl concept that, you're actually trying to excel once you're out to become a team that has the most points to then slide into the first spot so that you're not just totally giving up on the league. And again, that's how you lose players. For those of you out there that are league managers, that's a good way to retain people, is to make it competitive at the end. Again, some poor slob that would be an idiot and trade away his entire draft, who would ever do that, might be less inclined to actually care. But at the same time, that's something you want to consider is making it competitive throughout. It just kind of keeps things going, keeps the rivalries going. And I think that's what helps drive good home leagues and leagues overall. But for those of you that are in, 25 leagues, I know you don't care. It's cool.
Yeah, I do like the toilet bowl in our league. I think it absolutely keeps people involved and engaged, and it keeps it, it's a fun way. Like we use it to decide the draft, like you said, the draft order for the following year. So, if you win the toilet bowl, you have the first pick next year. So I think, it's very important. I know in a league where we do something similar in another league that I'm in, we ended up getting the first pick this past year, and Christian McCaffrey was available. He wasn't able to be kept again this year. So, or actually I think that was last year, but either way, those toilet bowls can absolutely, especially if you're playing for something like that for draft position or whatever, they absolutely can make the difference the following year in situations like that. So definitely good to keep everybody involved and keep going and keep the trash talk going a little bit. You know what I mean? That's part of the fun of fantasy football. So I think that's going to do it for us for this week. It's about time that we get rolling here. So Merry Christmas to everyone out there. I hope you all got what you wanted for Christmas. If it was a fantasy football win, then hopefully you got that as well. And we're here to hopefully get you on to a Happy New Year as well.
Well, I got what you wanted. Thank you, by the way. I received a parcel the other day just before the holiday and opened it up. Didn't know if it was podcast related. And it was. This fine gentleman got me a silent mouse. For those of you scoring at home, I know it drives him berserk for the editing to hear click, 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 and so on. So I got a silent mouse. The irony is my wife also got me one, and my wife and Pat are cousins. So my wife completely hates Pat right now. So needless to say, I guess the fact that she's also not angry at me, we all got what we wanted for the holidays. And on that note, folks, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa. Thanks for listening. And we will see you with our Week 17 starts and sits for Pat. I am Scott. Peace.